course, are old friends from UT, and so yeah, it's nice to have you back in Austin. You've been living in your hometown now for how many years?
I've been back in Auburn, Alabama for 9 years.
Okay. So you grew up in Auburn, born in 1961, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Give us a little backstory about what led you to pursuing art, becoming an artist.
I don't think this is uncommon because a lot of other people that I've talked to that draw or consider themselves to be somewhat of an artist kind of started out doing things like, you get the comic book on Sunday and you get your pencil and paper and you copy Snuffy Smith, or you copy Beetle Bailey, and you try to see how good you are at doing that. And I got to be pretty good at it. And then, you go and you get a comic book trying to draw like Marvel comics, or you're trying to draw, you're trying to draw more advanced things that are in the funny papers. You're trying to do foreshortening that's in the superhero comic. I mean, drawing was the foundation. I was drawing on the wall in my parents' house. I was drawing under the table. Because that was, after I drew on the wall, that didn't go very well. And then drawing under the table was like this hidden thing that nobody knew was under there until we decided that we needed a new table, and people found out, oh, he drew a picture under the table. And
it might be worth money now.
Yeah, but I don't know where that table is. So this table, the drawing under the table was a picture of pretty much an African American man with an afro and a beard. And I guess that was like me, like trying to draw my projection of who I thought I would be when I got older. Well, of course, that didn't happen. So the afro, I got a beard, but the afro's not there. So, but my parents were like surprised when they saw it. Basically, I needed an outlet. So, up until like elementary school, there were not any outlets in school. There were no hours devoted to having students draw. And then once I got into junior high, then there was, an art teacher, and you could elect to take that class.
Sure.
And, my friends that were doing projects like, their science project, and they knew they needed someone to draw a picture of a plant, they'd come and get me to do it. Of course, that was a lot because there was a lot of people that were doing these things. And
teacher didn't catch on that all these drawings seemed to look
yeah,
similar.
they knew who was doing the drawings. They were just happy that the people were actually, I would do the drawing, and then they would do all the other stuff, like the information that was around it that was written. They would do that part, and then they would actually write their paper. So they didn't really care that people weren't drawing those things. So
that's very generous.
well, it's Alabama.
Okay.
What can I say? Finally, time to graduate, and not really knowing what I wanted to go to school for. And I decided, my parents were like, okay, it's like the week before you have to decide, and you haven't done anything. And so I just decided to go pick a school. And they were not very happy that I was trying to go into being an artist, because I had shown an aptitude for being good in science, and I was making good grades in chemistry. I was making good grades in math, calculus, analysis. I was making A's, and these are college grade classes that
right.
are being given at my high school. And so they saw an application for me being a scientist or something like that.
Well, and your parents both have those backgrounds, right?
Right. Well, my mother is, was an educator for 35 years, taught elementary school, and my dad was in the military and actually like went to MIT and was a genius with numbers and math, and so physics and chemistry came easy to him, and and my mom was good with all facets of education at the same time. So, they were hoping that I was going to go that way. And I mean, in hindsight, which I had because that's where the money is. The money's not over here, the money's over there. But as a kid, I'm like thinking that's more fun and this is boring. Or not boring, but it was just, I could do it, but it was just tedious, and there was no, your physics professor, your chemistry teacher, they're not sexy, they're not, there's no glamour in that, there's just like, it looks like hard work, or it looks like tedious work, or it looks like, unless I just make some ultimate discovery, this is not going to go very good. Auburn University, just because I want to satisfy my parents. And I went there, and basically I flunked out. I didn't do a good job of being an art student. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't serious. I was at the same time being a manager of a fast food pizza restaurant, and I had a girlfriend, and I was trying to do the girlfriend, the pizza place, the school, and all this stuff at the same time, and I couldn't do any of it worth failing. Great.
Okay.
So I kind of failed at all of those things. Or I had went with some friends and decided that I was going to join the Air Force, and that definitely was not something I really wanted to do. It was just something I just wanted to get out of town because I thought I had failed, and I was like, maybe this is something simple I could do. I went with 2 other friends, and we were all supposed to go on this buddy thing. The recruiter put all of our information in a packet together, and when we got there, my buddy's information, both of their information were in the packet, and mine disappeared.
Oh.
No one could find it, so I didn't go in. And then so I was sitting at home, pining over like, what am I doing? I'm wasting my life. I'm no good. I can't even get in the military. And then my best friend from high school, called me from Gainesville, Florida, and he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm probably getting ready to go to Air Force. I'm like, are you crazy? And he said, well, just come to Gainesville and, hang out. So I went to Gainesville for basically a 2-week stay while the military was still looking for my papers. And while I was there, I went and I was having a good time, went to the beach, did all this stuff, and then, I got there on a Friday, and then on a Sunday, we started talking, and he was like, well, why don't you go down to junior college and see what's going to happen? So I went to junior college, I took the entrance test, I passed it, they gave me a work study and a Pell Grant, and all of a sudden, I'm in college. And, and I'm back in college to study art. And it was so much better because, Auburn University was a big university, so, I was just like one of like 400 people in a room. At junior college, I was one of like 40 people in a room. So it was easier to get attention,
Mm-hmm.
and easier to have access to the professor, or easier to have access to, just information and knowledge and
Sure.
stuff. So that all worked out a whole lot better. Proceeded to excel and, into becoming an artist, and actually being confident about like that I wasn't a loser and that I could not learn, and that I did not fit in the system, but basically I did not fit in the big system. So I had professors that were at my junior college that were very interested in promoting my education. So they were interested in like making sure I did certain things to augment my education, as far as like, doing lighting for theater. even though that was totally not related to art, but it was just like keeping me busy doing things that were active and creative. And then my art history teacher actually took very personal interest in making sure that when I reached a point where I could not take a class because of scheduling, she actually came to my work study and taught me as if I was in an independent study with her while I was working.
Mm-hmm.
And so these were things that people did that they didn't have to do. And other people that worked there, that I worked with in the audiovisual department said, well, that woman never really talks to anybody. So if she's helping you with your education, you should be very grateful that she even has time to deal with you.
Right.
And I didn't know this, because I didn't really know her personally that well until, she started to do this thing. And so
I would imagine that made you feel special and
well, it made me feel like I
worthwhile.
Worthwhile and valid. I mean, till this day, most of my friends don't believe that I was actually a college professor.
An author.
Or, yeah, my friends in Auburn.
That you grew up with.
They don't believe that I was a college professor. They think that I was off somewhere in prison.
Okay.
Because they have no proof of that, and okay, I'll put it like this. When I was in 11th grade, I ended up getting in National Honor Society.
Okay.
My friends could not believe that I was in National Honor Society because they did not see any proof that I was in National Honor Society. And then in 12th grade, I was in National Honor Society. And then even once I went to college, and when I was in graduate school, I'm going to skip it forward just
Sure.
to illustrate this point. People would be like, well, I see him at school, and he's being a TA, and he's doing his work as a TA, but I never see him making any work. But then when it comes time to have a critique, he shows up with all this work. Where is this work coming from? Is he doing it himself, or is he paying somebody else to do it?
What?
So this is how people were thinking, because they still, and these are not friends that I grew up with. These are just people that I know, that I just met. And so they were thinking how is he doing this? I'm watching him when we're at school, and he doesn't seem to be doing it at school. And where is this work coming from? And so there was the idea. Someone even said it that he's paying someone to make his work.
Okay.
Right. So, but what they didn't know is that I've always had this problem. Is that I can go to sleep for 4 hours and I'm charged up like I'm slept 8 hours. And so I would be at my apartment making work. I'll go back to being in Alabama, being trying to be an artist and wanting to be an artist, and also going to my grandfather's place in Atlanta where he was a mechanic, and being able to find little cast-off things that he had all kinds of parts.
Sure.
That I would grab and I'd start making stuff with. So it wasn't the fact that I needed a lot of things to make things, or that I needed to be in front of people to make things. I could do these things silently alone by myself in the corner or in my apartment. But it was always this case of people would be like, how is he doing this? And they would not believe that I was legitimately doing this on my own, and that I was actually paying people, or that I was not.
That's just a bizarre idea.
Well, that I was not a legitimate college professor, because they just didn't believe that Steve Jones could be a college professor. Anyway.
I suppose. Have you wondered about this? Why is it? Is it
No,
they just don't have context? They don't have other
examples
of.
Well, I think they didn't have other examples of this, And it's not something that I just go out telling everybody anyway, because in that community it was so foreign that, if I started talking about it, people were just like, what is he talking about?
Art.
Yeah, he's talking about art, and and he's being passionate about it, and we don't do that, so I guess that was the reason why no one believed it, and actually and he's got money, so, and they didn't believe that that's something that people paid money for. I mean, or that you could go get a degree for, even though, there are people that know that it is, but they still don't believe it. Anyway, so
your family, I still believe that you are an artist.
Well, they knew that.
Yeah.
But they weren't talking to everybody about it.
So you're, dipping into art through drawing,
Right.
but you studied sculpture. So how did that shift into 3D and
Well, I think, like I was talking about earlier, like with my grandfather, the whole idea that he had parts around, and there were three-dimensional objects, and I was making like found objects when I was like 8 years old. Just playing in his basement and screwing things together. He didn't teach me how to weld or anything, but I had access to pliers and screwdrivers and stuff like that, and clamps and things that I could like make these weird looking things that he would be like, what are you doing over there? And he'd like, basically nothing ever happened with them. So I think that was the beginning of me like wanting to make three-dimensional things. And then, and it's always been my personal joke to tell people, and basically to tell painters, who mostly every one of them takes an offense to this, is that the natural progression of any artist is to start off drawing, start in paint, and then evolve into being a sculptor.
Yeah.
Because that is the ultimate artist, is being a sculptor. You're making three-dimensional things that are physically in your space. Two-dimensional images are all just trump Floyd. Initially, in the beginning, I wanted to be like this big sculptor that made big things. But big things cost money.
Sure they do.
And then I figured out a different path of being a sculptor and making things that were like as intimidating as big things, but not without being big. So there's a thing that happens, like when you're a man and you're like in the presence of small children and they're running around. There is this thing where they're at a level where you're not really paying attention to them, but they always happen to either like come and hit you in your sweet spot, and you're like, oh wait. So there's a danger zone. Things that are below your level. Like, so when you're an adult and you go to an adult event, your eye level's up here. You're like talking to people up here. You're not focusing on anything down there unless there's like snakes or chickens or hogs or pigs or dogs down there. So it became interesting to me to focus on sculptures that were below your waistline.
Okay.
Or below your knees or down by your ankles. So I started making things that were on the floor.
Okay.
And that was my focus. So, when I made the piece Chicken Niggas Attack, it's like 7 chickens in a flying wedge with G.I. Joes with bullets on them, but it's all down low, and then it's got this name, and they look like they're going to attack you. So it was just a different dynamic as far as like the loaded political part, the loaded social part, the loaded danger factor, and then there's this thing that's not up here in your face, it's down there, and then you have to look down and look at it. So, and I kind of got this idea from when I went to the Vatican. When you go to the Vatican, everything that you look at is like up here. Mm-hmm. And when you leave the Vatican, you're like, oh God, I'm so tired.
Yeah, your neck hurts.
Well, and your blood flow has been constricted, you
Yeah.
know, which is part of the thing about, like, if you want people to, like, accept Jesus and be in awe of Jesus, you know, you gotta, like, cut off the flow to their brain, and then they will be conscripted to believe whatever you're telling them, right?
Okay.
You know, in the sense of how every.
I'm not sure they were actually thinking that, but
Well, I think they might have.
maybe they did.
Yeah. The idea that when you're looking up top, you're looking at something heavenly. And when you're looking down, you're looking at something hellish.
Okay.
And that was my whole deal, is that, you know, there might be things happening down that might not be hellish, and there might be hellish things happening up there that might not be heavenly. You know, so my whole idea was to, like, I focused on making a whole bunch of work that never got past your shoulder length, and actually focused on you actually having to look down at it. That was basically smaller than you, but had a political or social issue attached to it that was, like, maybe bigger than you, or, you know, more dynamic, you know, and that was very interesting to me because it got a lot of attention, because people were like, well, you know, I know I shouldn't be, like, intimidated by this thing, but because of the subject matter and what's going on with it, it is threatening. And so that was more like playing on people's psychological notions of what art is, what am I looking at, you know, and also I got good at, like, being able to push people's buttons, you know, and make them, and a lot of that was because, okay, I was having this conversation with a friend who was like, you know, your art is so much like macho black man. I was just like, well, I said, wait a minute, you know, like, so you tell me it's macho black man because I'm using these, like, stereotypical black man, like, iconographic images or objects in my work, and then I said, but what you're not asking me is, like, how am I supposed to make work that projects me as not being a black man? I can't do it. You know, I don't know how to do this. You know, you're asking me to do something I can't do, but because you're upset that I'm doing it too well, and I'm pissing people off because it's kind of, like, very dynamic in the way that I'm doing it. And I'm like, well, you know, I don't know how to make work like I'm a black woman or a white woman or a white man, or even, like, if I'm an alien. I don't know how to do this. You know, this is the only way I work. And so why are you being demanding of me to, like, not be this person? You know, at that time I was, like, really kind of offended by that, because I was having fun pushing people's buttons. I was having fun, like, putting, like, stereotypical sexual things in front of people, and, like, you know, watching them squirm. You know, because I was like, you know, I'd go to my openings, like, stand way across the room and, like, be, like, giggling while people were, like, over there, oh God, you know, and other people were, like, over there trying to touch these things that they shouldn't be touching, you know, and so that was, like, thrilling to me. But then, you know, at some point I realized I could do that anytime I wanted to. It was, like, becoming very easy, and I didn't like that. So, and also,
Like, you wanted another challenge.
right. Well, and also the challenge became the fact that in the art world sphere of people that knew me, and, you know, I had gotten, like, to the point where, like, a lot of people knew who I was and knew what I was doing. They were like, well, you don't really want Steve Jones to show in your show, you know, because he's gonna do something, or he's gonna make something that might make a major contributor to your museum leave.
Okay.
And that happened several times, you know, because of things that I made. So that started to make me not want to be that person either. And I was like, okay, you know, and then I was kind of confused for a while, like, what do I do? Like, you know, I don't know where to go. and
With your work.
with my work. I mean, because the funniest part about all of this was that people would I would make these works that seemed like I was socially, politically angry black man.
Okay.
But me as a person was never that socially, politically angry. I never went on a protest. I never marched in the street. I never did any of that. But if you looked at my work, you would think that I was out there doing that. And I wasn't doing that, and it wasn't even that,
Well, obviously you cared deeply about the subject, though.
Right. Well, maybe I was watching TV and making these pieces to actually do my part because I wasn't going to go out there and march, and I wasn't going to go to jail, because because a long time ago my dad told me if you go to jail, I ain't coming to get you. So that was not an option.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was proud to do these pieces, and I was kind of proud that people were kind of blackballing me for doing these things, but then it kind of made me think that like I said, if you can push people's buttons, and I know I can push their buttons, and I know I can make certain things that were going to get certain results, then I kind of felt like, well, maybe I'm not being effective, or this might be weak in a way, because they're going to win. I was showing quite a bit, and people would, call me up to be in shows.
And then it dried up.
And then it dried up because of this whole idea that I was bad news.
I have to ask, is there a short story version that will illustrate this point?
Well, yeah, there's a short story.
That won't upset
so
too many people?
There was a Jacob Lawrence tribute show, Houston Museum of Art. In coalition with this show, they wanted to have young artists, black artists, be in another show that was across the street at the Glassell School. And I had a piece that was called The Coors Clan. And it had Coors beers in a triangular barbecue pit with barbed wire and stuff sticking off of it, and with conical hats that looked like Ku Klux Klan hats with candles in the top sticking up out of this barbecue pit, and it had a cross, and it was like a shopping cart, so you could push it around, so it was mobile. And then it had a barbecue pit with charcoal in the bottom. And so the person that was high up in the Coors organization was on the board. And he walks in to see this while they're showing all of the highfalutin people around to see after they had seen the Jacob Lawrence exhibition before it opened, they went to go see what the young, new, fresh visions, new voices people are doing, and this guy sees it and blows a nutty. I mean, he's just like, oh my God, I'm on the board of Coors, and this guy is trashing Coors, and he was like, if you don't take this piece out right now, I'm quitting. And he was like some 80-year-old white guy. He was not a very happy camper.
He was challenging to deal with.
He had been a problem in the system of voting on what was acceptable art pieces at the museum earlier in previous historically other exhibitions. They were happy to offer him the option to go ahead and leave, and he left. And so when he left, he took basically the money that he was bringing from the Coors organization disappeared, and so, but see, I was under a different mindset, because my mindset was thinking about Hans Hoppe, who made this controversial piece, and then he actually went to the corporation, and they actually negotiated, and they actually did some progressive things in communities, and then they actually bought his piece, and then they
It affected change.
Right, it affected change. But then other people said that whole thing with Hans Hoppe was they removed his piece from being visible because they took it and put it in some corporate office, and then the little bit of change that they made in the society was nothing. So I at least wanted to try this, but I never got a chance because nobody included me in the process. So what happened was they decided that they didn't want the guy to be on the board anymore. My piece was going to stay in the show, but then in the relative like art community in Houston, the buzz was Steve Jones is bad.
Even though they seemingly
They
understood that and made that choice.
Right. So, I mean, my only regret about it was that I was not involved in the process and was not able to like speak with this person or, and maybe negotiate something or not.
Right.
That was the downfall. So from that point, and also there's the other factor of like when you have a president that's like seems to be like a Republican president that seems to be against arts funding or progressive funding or anything that's like going to help minority or fringe groups. If that's the president, then all of a sudden you end up with all this money that sprouts out of nowhere where people are promoting that. And so you can get grants or you can get all these things that will, if you have a Democratic president who's all about like, we should listen to minority groups and stuff, that funding dries out because, that's not the time. The time is when there's an edge. So once there's something to fight for, then, people start donating money. So, and I've seen this cycle come and go, a ton of times.
You're talking about funding for arts that has a social and political bent is more active,
Right.
with more interest and engagement from those that would fund these things.
Leadership is not for those things, like, helping homeless people or doing, things that you would normally want to do for society. Once that happens, then all of a sudden you get a trend where, there's funding for this, or there's people that are creating shows to show this. And I've been in shows where they were like emphasized like artists that had work that were socially aggressive or that were about political issues.
Right.
And, so in the 90s, I just finished graduate school and I was doing these kind of works, and so I was doing performance art, and I was doing, making political and social statements. So I was getting a lot of work. And,
Once the political climate changed.
Right. Once the political climate changed, I was not getting that kind of work. And also, and you call people that have been calling you all the time, and you'd be like, hey, so-and-so, I was wondering, they're like, oh, I can't talk to you, Steve, click. I decided that I was being manipulated, that people were pushing my buttons to get me to do things to help them. So, like, in the sense of this, like, so if I'm doing a show with this certain entity and they're getting governmental funding, I'm getting paid a small stipend while they're getting big budget money off of my political and social input into their product.
Okay.
And I felt like I was being manipulated and used because the institution is going to always get more money than me, and they're not willing to support me when they're not getting money for that because I'm not the person that they want to call. They're calling other artists, instead of calling me in a time like, they didn't say, well, Steve, we're not doing a social and political thing, but could you make us something beautiful? That would have been like, well, I could try.
Sure.
So, but they weren't calling me at all because they didn't, I guess, think that, well, more than anything else, my name was not being associated with that, making things that were beautiful.
Sure.
And I became like kind of upset with that. because I was like, I could make beautiful things. You know, I was at UT, and then John Yancey shows up as a painter, and then we became friends. And then he told me he had this project where he was doing this mosaic mural for the convention center in Austin. So I was like, okay, you know, and I've always been a person like that would just like, well, I don't know how to do that, but I'll tell him I do, and then hire me.
Okay.
So I picked him up from the airport to bring him for his interviews when he was first beginning to want to get the job at UT. So, and then, we became friends after that, and then, he talked about this mural project, and I was like, I want to help you do this. And so after we made the platform and, we sketched out the whole thing, and then we were just filling in the space, I would be in the warehouse doing this. And this was all at the same time that I was kind of being blackballed for being the bad boy and making these social and political works that nobody wanted to see anymore or weren't being funded anymore. So I was like going through a lot in my head, and I was like doing this, and so when it occurred on me, like after a couple of days of doing this thing, that I taught on Monday and Wednesday, he taught Tuesday, Thursday, so we would not be there until the weekend together. And while I would get there at like 8 o'clock, and then I'd start filling in the space and broken tile mosaic, and I was like, my mind would wander. I would be thinking about other things like paying bills and fixing my car, but still filling in the space, and then time was just boundless. So, and I was engulfed in doing this thing. And then the next thing I know, it's like 5 o'clock and John's knocking on the door and coming in the building. And I'm like, oh, is it 5 already? And I was thinking it was like 10 minutes. So I was like intrigued by this process of making this art that was making time disappear and also making it peaceful and blissful. And I hadn't experienced that ever. I wasn't a person to do meditation or yoga or anything like that, so this was kind of doing that to me. And I was surprised by this. I mean, very surprised. I'm still surprised by this because it still does it to me, and to this day. I was very interested about like acquiring or wanting this to be something that I could experience on a daily basis without, because I mean, even though I wasn't this angry black man, I got tired of making the work that made me look like I was an angry black man. So I started making small mosaics, like about this big. And I started making little mosaic tables, little mosaic things. And they were really just abstract, just colors, not really patterns yet. And then I wanted to make bigger ones. And my quest with the bigger ones was to take it from being a two-dimensional thing and making it a three-dimensional thing. And
because of course sculpture is far superior.
That's right. Yes. I was, even though I was getting this sense of bliss from it being a two-dimensional activity, that I was filling in space and it's like filling in a puzzle, and that was giving me gratification that I was doing it, and time was disappearing, and my mind was wandering. I was thinking about several things at the same time. I had this sense of euphoria and bliss. I guess endorphins were popping in my brain or whatever. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt good.
Yeah, how did you get interested in masons and how did these pieces develop at their deeper degrees?
Okay, well, it's going to be kind of a bizarre story, but I'll tell you.
Okay.
Here in Austin, and meeting people at parties and talking to people at parties, I was talking to someone telling me about this book called Where Eagles Dare. it's an underground book, but this person gave it to me. And in this book, it starts talking about the Illuminati and how the Illuminati has been controlling things for centuries. And, you know, and it talks about the fact that the Illuminati is the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table searching for the Holy Grail. They're on this like heroic, you know, manly crusade to save humanity, right? So in this book, it talks about how from there, this society basically started to control the world through religion, through government, through politics, through banking, through finance, and all these other things. This was like unbelievable because when you're reading this information, you're like, really? The Masons were the culmination of the Illuminati, and that, you know, most of the United States presidents were Masons. Most of the leaders of other countries are Masons. Most of the people that work in banks, they're Masons, or people that are CEOs of banks are Masons. Most of these people, I don't know if this is true, but that's what the book was saying. Sure. And it said, you know, this person's a Mason, that person's a Mason. You know, and then all these people are successful people, right? And powerful people. And to me, that you actually have to initiate it to do these, to move up in rank. And so that's how I got interested in this 33 degrees thing. Instead of me going from, because I'm not a Mason, and so I decided to create my own dynamic of how I wanted to be initiated. Okay. I was going to go from 33 down to 1. And thinking that in the reverse action of like 1 is the highest, because I'm the 1, and there's only 1 degree, and you can't be higher than me.
Okay.
The 33rd degree first piece was like a flat 2-dimensional piece, and then as I went to 32 degrees was flat with some orbs that were 3-dimensional on them, and then 30, 31, 30, 29, and 28 were all like really carved styrofoam 3-dimensional pieces that where 2 of them were hanging and 2 of them were on the ground. And the idea was that as I finished these things, that I would be completing an initiation rite where I would be moving along in life.
Right, in your own.
In my own way.
Masonic.
In my own personal Masonic way that had nothing to do with the Masons at all, because they would deny that any of this has anything to do with them. It was just for my own personal satisfaction, and you know, and naming them things like 33 degrees or 23 degrees or 25 degrees would be like the fact that if a Mason or someone that was familiar with this whole Illuminati thing came by and saw it, then they'd be intrigued by it. You know, they'd be like, what is this guy doing? You know, should we be trying to stop him? You know, what?
You're trying to get in trouble with the Masons.
No, I wasn't trying to get in trouble with the Masons. I was just up to doing something. I mean, I've always been up to doing something. Like I was up to drawing on the bottom of my mom and dad's table.
Yes, some kind of troublemaking.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's not any fun unless I think I'm about to get in trouble.
Okay. So what happens when you're at 1 degree? Do we know?
No, we don't know.
We don't know yet.
I have to go sub-degrees.
So you have 27, 26, and 25 degrees here in the show.
Yes.
So you covered these basketballs with the tile and have the dice represent a number of a degree.
Right.
I can't help but imagine that the objects, the materials that you are using have a symbolic relevance to you.
A dice has a object or as a thing has been used for ancient centuries for accounting, for gambling, for all kinds of things, for game playing. Like I had this epiphany one time, like I was thinking about, well, I was making a series with crosses, and I was thinking about the idea that faith and religion was similar to gambling. You have to think you're going to win. Winning is, I'm going to go to heaven in a religious sense. Winning in gambling is, I'm going to win and I'm going to get money. So it's kind of the same principle. And so I was kind of astonished by this idea that gaming and religion had this kind of thing in common, hope and winning and faith that you were going to win. And so, and then the things that you use to gamble with were like, dice. I was doing things with dominoes. I was doing things with, like playing cards, because those are the things that people use to gamble, not necessarily they use them in religious things. So I was like putting dice and dominoes on crosses. I was putting like cards and Lorita cards from Mexican, Lorita cards on crosses, and these are things that people use to play games with. So 3 pieces that are in the show. I was in Fort Worth. I was making a public piece for John Yancey, and I was like trying to make it perfect and pristine. And then at the same time, I was in the hotel trying to make my work, and I was like, after I had been on the job site all day, hot and sweaty, and I'd come home, take a shower, and I'd be like, oh, I'm not feeling like I want to really make something that's like nice and sparkly right now. So I was like, I'm going to make these things crusty, and that's going to be part of my initiation to the next degree that I'm going down. So the interesting thing was that the last 2 that I made were 6 years ago for this show that was at the Still called 1/6, about me and the 6 other Black African American grad students that had graduated from UT Austin, and I had put 2 orbs in that show, and they were like nice and shiny, and they had dice on them, and at that point I really liked them 6 years ago being nice and shiny, but now I was not feeling that, so I made them kind of crusty, and there's like a little bit of shine coming through, but not a lot. The dice are the one thing that's the most shiniest part of the piece, and so I don't know if I was learning a lesson. I don't know what that means. I think that just means that's the frame of mind that I was in, and that maybe that's something to learn a lesson from. I don't know. And I'm not sure that I personally aesthetically like them being crusty. I think that other people might want them to be shiny.
Or expect them to be.
Or expect them to be shiny.
But you often want to do something unexpected.
Right, but I like the fact that they could be shiny. The shininess is underneath.
Yeah.
If you want to look and find it, and if you want to take the time to maybe scrape it off, it's there. But, and it's like one of those little oxymoron comments, like the shininess is there if you want to find it. Like,
Sure.
You're like, yeah, shut the fuck up. You're like, really? Do you believe, that's one of those things where I'm like, oh, so you think you're so smart, with that little statement. But, it is true. It is there, and if you want to find it, you have to look beneath. Now, it would be like
what about the significance of them being basketballs?
Well, the basketball part is just because they're round, and that's like the easiest, cheapest thing that I can get that's round.
Okay.
I think in a broader sense, like with anybody's work, you can like have social and political issues that could be attached to that. But most people don't even know that it's a basketball under there. You know, but it's purely technical.
Sure, that you chose
But
it.
if somebody wanted to look at it, it could be a social and political issue. But I don't consider it to be that
Okay.
personally, because it's covered up completely.
I mean, to me, that's an interesting level to it, that it has this, and it's covered up. It has this, and now it can never be that.
Right. Well, and which is the other part. I mean, you know, if I was to talk about my history with sports, we'd be like, yeah, I played baseball, I played basketball, I played football when I was a kid, and that was like a seemingly way to get out of the ghetto or to get out of poverty or to move on and make millions of dollars.
Right.
Well, I never was able to do that. So
Like most people.
right, like most people. So, I mean, the percentages of people that actually have that happen to them are like astronomically low. And basically,
kind of like making it as an artist as well.
Right.
100%.
And also, it's as if like, you know, if I covered up the basketball, it's the same like you said. You cover up that potential is never ever being used, or it never manifests itself.
The idea that this object that represents this degree, that you were heading towards one eventually,
Yeah.
went from 2D to 3D, 3D clean, now it's 3D, I don't know, dirty or covered.
I'm gonna have to really think about where I'm headed with the next set of degrees, because I think the roundness of the degrees are pretty much over with.
We'll see.
Yeah, there could be some other dynamic that interjects itself into this narrative.
So, at some point, you started working, this sculptor started working and drawing again.
When I was working at UT Austin, I subscribed to National Geographic, and every time you got a National Geographic, you got 2 or 3 different maps. You know, after teaching at UT for 15 years, that became a time where, you know, I was in the sculpture area, so I kind of basically lost my job. And when that happened, I wasn't prepared for it, and I kind of was upset by this, and I decided that I wasn't going to work. And so I went and got unemployment, and I took out the maps, and I put the maps on the wall, and went and bought a bunch of Sharpies, and I just started drawing, and as something to do. And my goal at that point was to draw on a map 1 a day. That lasted for like 6 months, and then I got a job at Southwest Texas teaching 3D design, and then I got a job at ACC teaching 3D design, and then I could only do it on the weekends because I had jobs.
Okay.
And so, but by then I had like amassed like all these maps, and it was a long time before anybody, or I even thought about showing them. I mean, I think in the beginning it was just the activity to kind of calm my mind down and not to be angry about not working at the time, and being unemployed, you know, because that wasn't like a very good feeling. And
Earlier you were talking about how you noticed when you were doing mosaic that you had these moments of feeling carefree flying and kind of these moments of bliss. And you've talked before about how in these drawings and the maps, it's a similar thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
As I was telling someone today, there was always this idea of like approaching a drawing, being confident enough in myself to know that I'm not going to make a mistake, or there is no mistake, and that I'm going to start and carry this out to the end. And so there was no like point of anxiety of like, I'm going to make a mistake or something's going to be wrong with this or I'm not going to like it, and so that was like the freeing part about doing these drawings, or what I call big doodles, was that I could like actually free my mind enough to be like that. And so it would be just like mostly just having concentrating on letting my arm do what my arm wanted to do, even though my brain is telling my arm to do these things. But in some sense, I'm like, oh, okay, just go over here and go over there and then go over here, and but being confident enough to like when I'm going there, I'm not like, oh, you shouldn't have went that way.
Right. You're not hesitating.
So there was no second guessing about what was happening to the paper, what I was putting on the paper. Everything I was putting on the paper was appropriate and was going on as I wanted it to. And some people don't believe me when I say that. They're like, well, that's not true. You had to make a mistake. I'm like, well, I know I might have made one, but you don't. It was just really funny. But I still didn't consider myself to be making mistakes. I was like always satisfied with like, if this is what happened with this drawing, that
you can work with it.
I initially intended for it to come out this way.
Yeah.
And I was satisfied with that outcome, and that helped me not to be, it helped for me to have a sense of bliss in the idea of, I'm getting ready to do this, and this is how it's going to be, and the outcome is going to be pleasurable for me, and I'm not going to be angry about it. And so just the whole process from start to finish was a blissful thing. And I don't think, it's like if you're building a house, or if you're doing if you're pouring concrete in your driveway, there's always a sense of dread of like, oh, if I fuck this up, or if I do the wrong thing, it's not going to be perfect, and I wanted to eliminate that part of the process of like being worried that something might go wrong.
Right.
Because that's always like, that leads into like your mind thinking about fear and things that I did not want to be involved in my art making.
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't want to fear the fact that I was approaching the canvas or the paper to draw, and that would make me not want to do anything. So I was like wanting to eliminate any possibility of that being involved in the art making process at all. And but other people believe that you can't eliminate that, but it's a difficult.
Well, you're talking to the wrong person with that then, because I definitely subscribe to the belief that you can let go of that fear.
Right.
While the initial reason why you started to do these maps might have come from a different place, you have created this body of work that, and now we're surrounded by these maps, right? It's quite something to be immersed in these images and these doodles taking over, coming off of the page of the map. Can you talk a little bit about how you see them now being on the other side of the process.
One of the obvious answers to this question is the fact that, you know, when I would be doing them at my house, I would only see them singularly. So there was, you know, the process never happened where, you know, I would have them all up on the wall while I was doing another one.
Sure.
I would always put them away. And so I would, because I didn't want to be influenced by the last one, and I wanted them all to look different, even though I'm using like that same type of iconic design. Initially, when I was talking to people about them, I'd be saying crazy stuff like, well, not crazy stuff. I'd be like, oh yeah, they kind of look like if aliens came down and they were trying to like draw their map on top of our map.
Okay.
You know, as if they were like saying, well, forget what they got going on. This is what we're interested in. So we can block out all this other noise. And then the things that we can actually see, the information that's left, is what we're interested in. And, you know, some people accepted that as a viable explanation of what I was doing. And then other people went totally different directions of like, you know, started talking about redaction. And basically redaction, like redaction in a paper where, or like the CIA redacts an official document where all this information is blocked out because you're not supposed to read it. So I was talking to somebody about redaction with these, and they were talking about, yeah, you're blocking out information, so you're blocking out cities, you're blocking out lines of countries, you know, you're blocking out lines of states, you're blocking out counties, you're blocking out all these other information, and for some people that's an important thing, and a powerful thing. And so that was that conversation, which led to another conversation about like, you know, how, you know, in political senses, people like start redrawing boundaries of countries, they redraw boundaries of states, redraw boundaries of counties, redraw boundaries of cities. And then, you know, and so there was all this other thing about this other social political idea of like, you know, redrawing lines and information being blocked out or information being added in a way. And so that was a conversation that started to happen, but I never really wanted to, you know, I still wanted to hold on to the fact that I'm just doodling. And, you know, I don't mind if you see these things that way. Because whatever comes into your mind to make you maybe understand these better, or be like, I appreciate this thing. And then, you know, the biggest part of all of this is that, you know, no matter what map it was, people would be like, one of the affinities to the maps is like, I used to live right here, or, you know, I lived in that state, or I lived in that country, you know, and also that maps provide information that, you know, most people have always been able to read a map. I mean, you know, I was in school when they taught us to read maps, and now we don't really do that because you have a phone that will do it for you. And I have an affinity to maps. I like looking at maps. You know, so. And I think a lot of people have an affinity to maps, and always will.
Right.
I mean, and it's a physical thing that you can touch, and you can feel, and you can use it. It's a tool. I mean, it functions in a lot of different arenas, or, you know, depending on what you want to do with it.
So this idea of Steve Jones seeking ways to feel happy, to be blissful.
Well, you know, that came out of like me not always wanting to be the quote unquote angry black man.
Right.
You know, that's not fun. Nobody wants to do that all the time, you know, and it's like, this is something that I can have, that I can feel blissful with, that no one can take away from me.
Right.
You know, I could be in prison, I can still have this bliss as long as they give me a pen and a piece of paper, unless they deny that to me. Or it could be like anyone, like if I was an athlete and I was playing basketball or running, or if I was a poet or a writer or whatever, and I can't do the thing that I'm the most passionate about, and that's taken away from me, then, you know, I'm not going to be a very happy camper. I'm going to probably be very angry, and, you know, now, even in the sense of when, you know, you have a right to be angry because something happened to you and you felt violated, it's still, you know, like, let's say you're in your car and you're driving down the highway and you see this black man on the side of the highway, and he looks like he's very upset. And you're like, damn, there's another angry black man, you know, but you have no idea why he's upset or if he should be upset. But it just seems to be like, you know, okay, it's just like something like, okay, well, I expect to see that.
Right.
And I just don't want to see that. And I want it to be different. You never expect to see, driving down the highway, I don't even know what this looks like. A black man in bliss. What does that look like on the side of the highway? There's no iconic image of this or actions that show this in society. You know, so, I mean, you know, you have commercials that, you know, that's the specialty of a commercial, is to get over a certain iconic graphic image of, you know, happiness, pleasure, you know, I'm full because I just ate the best meal I ever had, but there is never any kind of iconic image or description of like a black man in bliss. I don't know if there's one with white women in bliss or white men in bliss or anyone in bliss, but you know, I would like to see this.
Yeah.
I think it would be good for everybody.
I imagine so. Thank you.